Welcome to Madame Raven's. This way to the library. She's been expecting you.
Hello, my darlings. Well, since the story I recorded for you has earlier this week been covered by a much more talented narrator, I'm throwing in a few short stories to start us off. The first is Whimsy by Testoblerone. After a couple of minutes of having dug into my banana split, I noticed the kid across the ice cream shop staring at me and smiling one of those shy, tight-lipped smiles 7-year-olds have mastery over. I smiled back. You smile back to shy kids. Then he began whimsically imitating my movements as we ate our treat. He imitated me. I imitated him. We each tried to come up with silly actions to stump the other. He almost got the better of me by offering a spoonful to his mom. But I managed to keep up by offering a full spoon to the empty air next to me, and then eating the ice cream myself. This was certainly a duel of wills, and very cute. Then the kid stood up, and so did I. I had wanted to stand up, but I had no idea why. The kid's mother caressed his hair and said, "Well done, sweetie. Let's bring him in for the procedure." And we all walked out of the ice cream shop, me a little behind. The kids still did a couple more silly things while walking out, which I didn't feel so silly when I copied them too. Sound Sleeping by Jamie Swinney. As I watched my own canine sleep soundly on my lap, I was reminded of a story a peddler once told me while I was in Eastern Europe. He asked, "Why don't aliens come to our planet?" An odd question for a stranger I'd just met, but an interesting one. I responded by saying that the odds are just too low for any species to find us. He chuckled, but his laugh was not from a place of hilarity. No. I raised my eyebrow and asked what his explanation could possibly be. For nothing extraterrestrial visiting our blue marble. He paused briefly and his eyes wandered to the ground. Then they shot back up and looked me dead in the eye. Fear. I was utterly bewildered by his response. What could another sapient species possibly have to fear about our planet? I informed him that the animals on the surface of our planet were nothing to invoke fear, as even the earliest humans were able to overcome them. He paused again, but retained eye contact. Well, that's easy, my friend. It's not what's on Earth they fear. It's what's within it. He didn't even give me a chance to respond, as he immediately followed up with, "He's in a deep slumber. Be glad he's not awake." And after making his point, he walked away. So then I watched my pet slowly stir, awake, as the thought of what the peddler said hung on my mind. As my dog gradually woke up, I wondered if whatever was in our planet would also awake from its slumber. I hope not. What I've Heard by Evan the Nerd, 83. I remember that morning. Me and my brother were walking to school when we discovered the snowman. It greeted us from across the street, right under Sammy's window. That was his name, Sammy. He lived across. We shared homeroom together. Anyway, I wasn't paying attention. It was just a snowman. But my brother could always tell. Eric could look and tell if something felt wrong, and he would always tell me. He was never shy about telling. He grabbed me by the elbow and pulled. I nearly screamed from how quick it was, and I thought that he was going to hurt me, throw me down, give me an Indian burn, him being a big brother and all. Not the case. Eric just hugged me, held me tight, and told me not to look, told me not to turn around. His voice sounded weird, like he was trying not to scream. I listened. What else could I do? He was bigger than me and stronger than me, and 16 while I was only 6. Also a member of the track team. So I didn't. Closed my eyes and listened. I've heard a lot of things since. I've heard they found no button nose or pieces of coal on that snowman, and that it was wearing Sammy's pajama pants and shirt. And I've heard that it even had his eyes. A Pleasant Dinner by Peppetti. I read the menu again. Grilled seagull. There it is. That's why I came here. Though I struggle to see how that sounds appealing to anyone, I still remember the taste, more distinctly than the breakfast I had this morning. May I have the seagull, please? My mind drifts to that day. Me, my wife, my children, and my best friend. All having the time of our lives in the open seas. My wife had never been a fan of sailing, but she always seemed to enjoy how happy it made me and the kids. I was glad we invited Dave, too. Been lonely after his divorce, and the kids saw him as the cool uncle they never had. Would you like a drink with that, sir? Just water, please. We were in the middle of the storm. I can barely see anyone, let alone steer the boat in any direction. The water filled up my ears, started to muffle my wife's screams. I managed to get a hold of something as we were continually thrown across the deck. The kids aren't so lucky. Anna's little neck snapping is the last thing I see before something heavy hits me in the head. Now that I think about it, I wish it had hit me before. I snap out of it to see my waiter approaching with a plate. Oh, it's been such a long time. The first thing I felt was Dave slapping me awake. I couldn't tell if his eyes were red from crying or the seawater. I looked around. Desert island. An island so small and barren, I didn't need to search for more than what seemed like an hour to find my wife and children before I gave up. I could still see the mast of our boat sinking slowly. It wasn't too far. Worst comes to worst, I thought. I'll see them soon. In our depressed, broken states, we started to search for whatever food or shelter this wasteland had to provide. The answer was clear after half a day. Nothing. Not even a single insect. We starved for 4 days, until I woke up to the smell of cooking meat. Thought I was hallucinating at first. Then I saw Dave, with a desperate smile on his face. Found a dead seagull, he said. We might survive this after all. Then after we had the first laugh we'd shared in days. Without the seagull, we'd have starved to death until the fishing boat rescued us. Now, after 5 years, all I want is to reminisce those days. Remember to how we kept fighting, even if all seemed lost. A tribute to the memory of my children, and a statement that I'll never forget the pain we've all been through. Many thoughts cross my mind as I take my first bite. Then they all stop. Now there's only one thought, one so horrible, I regret ever having it. This isn't what seagull tastes like. The next two are by Saya Pathakrit saying that right? The Return. He was standing in front of her grave, staring at the ground, and at the bouquet and the glowing candle that he had placed there. The sun had already set, and slowly the sky was changing its hue. The bright pinkish-orange color had long gone, and now darkness fell upon slowly. It was her birthday. It had been 18 years since he had lost her to cancer. Every year on her birthday, he used to come and offer her a bouquet and a candle. There had been no alteration to this practice. Every year he would come and wish silently for her, wishing that she would come back to him. The graveyard was quiet, too quiet, in fact. As night came, a deadly silence fell upon the graveyard. The wind whistled through the woods, beside the graveyard, breaking the silence sometimes. Suddenly, one such strong wind blew out the candle. He tried to light the candle again, but could not. Suddenly, he felt a bit uncomfortable. The wind was getting stronger, and in the woods a pack of wolves started howling. The silence and tranquility had been disturbed. All this continued for nearly 10 minutes. Those 10 minutes seemed like hell. His ears hurt from the shrill, shrieking cries of the owls. Then all the sounds stopped as suddenly as it had started. Once again a deadly silence fell upon the graveyard. Now he felt even more uncomfortable in the silence. And the silence was something that he was used to. Suddenly he felt the presence of something tugging at his back. He didn't have the courage to turn around and look at it. Something had returned, but it wasn't her. I can see ghosts. Yes, I have been seeing ghosts. You might have often heard about people being born with such abilities. Well, I wasn't born with them. I was a normal architect working for a local firm in my city. Then suddenly one day I started seeing ghosts. The thing is that I can see ghosts everywhere. I don't necessarily have to be in a desolate mansion or a creepy graveyard. I see the ghosts even when I'm walking in the streets, among the crowd. Unlike popular stories, they don't appear in the middle of the night. I can see them in broad daylight, walking beside me, going about and doing their job. Yesterday I was crossing the road when I saw one, an old lady walking down the middle of the road. I shouted at her because a truck was rushing towards her. Then it ran over the lady. Imagine the shock I received when I saw she was perfectly alive and walking normally. Now that I think of it, all of this started nearly 3 months ago after that incident. I was driving my car, and it was a rainy night. I still remember the sudden turn, my tires skidding out of control, and that bright yellow light, and the sudden blur followed by the darkness afterwards. I woke up in a morgue. Since then I've been seeing ghosts. I guess it's easier to see ghosts when you become one yourself. I do hope that you'll stay for the next story. You may have heard it before, but perhaps you'll enjoy my telling as well. Thank you, Grandma. By Minister of Owls. Trigger warning for sexual assault and suicidal thoughts. Be safe, my darlings. My father stood out my bedroom window. He'd been dead for 5 years. I was young. My grandmother used to tell me a story about the island we lived on. She used to tell me about the fairies in the treetops, the spirits under the sea, the ghosts on the cliff. But the story that stuck with me throughout my childhood were the stories about the demon in the woods, the night maker. She used to huff and puff whenever I asked her to tell me the story. I was too young, she'd say. I'd have nightmares and keep her awake. She'd relent eventually, though. She always did. The stories went that there was a demon who lived in these woods, a thing who saw nothing in love or family. It would watch us from the dark with hateful eyes for all that was beautiful. The people who lived near the forest had to be careful. The Nightmaker had a black soul, and he would drive all to despair if you let him near. He had so many tricks, so many ways to torture the people of the village. No trick was played twice. Even survival was not enough. Meeting him even once would scar you forever, and you would end up taking your own life. The one thing that always struck me about the Nightmaker was how purposeless he seemed. He had no reason to do what he did. All he wanted was to show the townspeople how horrible the world really was. At the end, cowardly little me would be shivering, and my grandma would tuck me into bed. She'd kiss me on my forehead and tell me the world was cruel, but she would be there for me. The old woman cared for me, she really did. On my 10th birthday, she got me an old-timey radio. She knew how interested I was in tinkering and machines. If I could fix it, she'd give me a prize. I think that's what attracted him. 3 days after my birthday, after grandmother kissed me, I was tucked into bed when I heard a noise. A tapping on the window. On my bedroom floor was a shadow of a man. I looked up at my window. My father was smiling at me. It had been so long since I'd seen my father's face. I forgot what he even looked like. I thought he was dead. But at that moment I recognized his smile. "Come on, kiddo, we gotta get to church." I didn't know what he was talking about. I didn't care what he was talking about. I got out of bed and opened my bedroom window. As I did so, he held out his hand, beckoning me to come outside with him. Maybe he was taking me to heaven. He held my hand tightly and I climbed out, making sure I was okay. He led me up a path in the forest, bounding on our house. We walked slow, but I didn't mind. I enjoyed the extra time holding his hands. As we headed into the trees, I heard a melody echoing around us. A singing was coming from deep within the forest, in the direction we were walking. "It's a nice song, isn't it?" I must have nodded because his smile grew wider. It was getting colder as we walked, and the song was getting closer. The children were singing it, many together. The trees, they were growing more twisted as we walked, their branches becoming more hand-like, like old men reaching out for me. His grip was so tight, his smile kept getting wider, stretching his skin as he stared into the dark. I gave slight resistance to his constant, "Come on, John, we have to get to church." Dad, my name isn't John." His expression didn't change. If anything, his smile got wider. He raised one long stretched finger and pointed in front of us. "Look at the church." A cave in the distance. A cave in the middle of the woods. It led down into the earth. His cold grip pulled me as he led me, as I lagged behind. This allowed me to realize a disturbing fact. His legs were on backwards. Whatever was holding my hand, it wasn't human. I jerked my hand away from him and stumbled back, ready to run. "Let's go inside the church, John." He turned to face me, and I screamed. His smile had grown and twisted the features of his face around it. His lips were ended around his eyes, so many teeth in a jaw that curved at me. The horrible grinning thing reached for me. I turned and bolted down the path. I glanced back to see the thing behind me, following me, walking at the same awkward pace, walking with those twisted legs. "I can see you!" The branches snagged at my clothes, clawing at my skin as I pushed through them, leaving red marks as they cut into face. The cold air turned into a rotted wind of stale air that pushed me back. It felt like hours, my time in that forest. Hours seeing that thing behind me. Hours hearing that tune. Hours struggling against the branches. All I could do was run. Away from the singing. Away from the thing coming near. When the light of my house came into view, I was about to collapse. My bedroom window. My grandma's house. My safe haven. I climbed in and locked the window after me. Crawled into my bed. I pulled my bed sheets up and waited, hoping to go to sleep or wake up from a nightmare. Slowly, after a few minutes had passed, I peeked out of my covers to see a new shadow on my bedroom floor. It was there, standing outside the window. He was so horribly deformed now. A living, rotting tree smiling at me through the window. Full black eyes and 2 red pinpricks in the center. It tapped on the window with those long fingers. "Let me in." I kept dead still. The finger pointed to the radio. It cackled to life. "Jack? Jack? John? Jerry. Come out, Jerry. Come out. You'll be safe with us, Jack. Come out." His voice. It was so wrong it made me sick. "Come to the church. Open the window. Open the window. Open the window. Go away!" The radio burst into a mad chant. "Open the window. Open the window. Open the window. Open the window. We'll watch you sleep. Watch you sleep. Open the window. Open the window. Go away!" It stopped for a moment. "One day you're going to leave the window open, and I'll crawl in and I'll remember what you did. I'll make you remember, too. Open the window and I won't hurt you." It stood, dead silent, waiting. A melody came from the radio. The same song I'd heard in that forest from the cave. "Let's sing along, Jack." A horrible series of animal noise and screeches echoed from the set. A woman in torture. A man laughing. All the while singing. It was such a horrible noise. My ears, they were being mutilated. Somewhere from upstairs, through the black cacophony, I heard a voice calling down, "Jack! Jack, is that you? What's going on?" The noises stopped. A frustrated voice came from the radio. Demonic howl. No pretense of friendship left.
"You're gonna be nothing. Nothing. You know where I see you in 10 years. I see you fat and dirty, hanging by a noose in your own room because you were so much of a failure."
I was just sobbing at this point. Just go away. Please go away. "Let me tell you the truth, Jack. The world is horrifying. It is empty and dark. In the end, it won't even matter if you came with me or not." The voices started to fade, as did the shadow on my bedroom floor. "You'll see that, Jack. You'll see that!" My bedroom door flew open as my grandmother came in. She hugged me but didn't say a word. She stayed by my side till I stopped sobbing and went to sleep. That night I had a horrible dream. Something was holding my hand and dragging me through the woods, to that cave deep within the forest. We went inside, and I saw the source of the singing. There was dozens of children, all naked and chained, lying on the cave floor. Their mouths moved up and down. All of their chains led to a hole in the cave floor. As I stared into the hole, my twisted father emerged from the depths and reached for me. I jolted awake, trying to get away from that cold grip. It turned warm, and I saw my grandmother's face in the morning light. My grandmother had fallen asleep in her chair by my bedside. She was still holding my hand. Every night after that for a week, she would stay with me. She wouldn't ask me what happened. It was like she just understood. I would never hear from my father again. Every so often, I'd look out at the trees bordering our house, and I'd see his face among the dead trees, smiling at me. "One day you're going to leave the window open." After the first time, I jammed the window lock so it couldn't be opened. After that, life continued. Life went and hit me unprepared, like a turtle belly side up. Living was hard, and I was alone. After school ended, I went through the lowest point of my life. And I'm not about to go through my entire life story here, so I'll keep the details. But it was bad. Sometimes I could almost hear him. "You know where I see you in 10 years? I see you fat and dirty, hanging by a noose in your own room because you are so much of a failure." This is the first time I'm admitting this to anyone, but there was a moment I believed the words I heard that night, that I was going to end up in a noose. Through it all, even when I left the house, my grandma would call me. She'd ask how I was doing, and I'd tell her I was all right. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel like a loser, having my grandma as my only friend in the world. But it got me through the week. It got me through lots of weeks on those phone calls. It was around 15 years later, or 780 weeks, when I got the call. It was her doctor. She was sick. She had been taken to the town hospital and was on life support. I got there within the night. It was there, on the white hospital bed. My grandmother let me know the truth. I was a child of rape. Her daughter, my mother, had been 15 when she met my father. He was a man, a trusted man of the town. She trusted him like an uncle. It was so easy to lure her into the trees where he would defile her. For 5 weeks after, my mother didn't say anything. It was only when it became too obvious, when she began to show, did she break down and talk to my grandmother. My grandmother wanted to call the police, but my mother begged her not to. My father was a horrifying man. She swore he would find her even in prison, even in death. There was a fear so bad in her she couldn't speak properly. She said he had promised her he would take care of her son, that he had a place in the woods for them to live in. Against the tears of her daughter, my grandma relented. They got married. The wedding took place in an empty church in the woods. For the next 4 years, my grandmother didn't see her daughter. When she did, it was sudden. She was bringing groceries when she saw a body lying near the edge of the forest. My mother was still alive, but just barely. She had lost so much in that time. So much hair, 60 pounds, 3 fingers. She still had me, though. She held me tightly like a little life vest. My grandmother had to pry her fingers open to get me some food. Over the next few hours, my grandma tried to get out as much as she could from her poor daughter. For half a decade, my mother had been dying in a nightmare. She wouldn't talk about where she'd been, only mutter about at church. She was broken in all of her spirit. Only the tiniest spark still resided in her body by the end of it, the spark she had used to escape with me. She left him when he had called me the wrong name. My grandma finally called the police. She locked all the doors, locked all the windows, and let her family sleep in peace for the first time in years. It was only later she learned the true extent of the monstrosity her daughter had escaped. The cops had found a cave in the woods. My father's church. So many bodies. So many children. All naked, all chained, all dead. They were emaciated, but not all had died of starvation. Their chains led to a dark pool where they found my father floating, naked and smiling at them. They electrocuted him. My mother would never stop having nightmares. My grandma would wake to find her muttering in her sleep, talking of how scared she was of him. The nightmares she had of his corpse standing outside her bedroom window, asking to be let in. Near my 5th birthday, my grandmother thought she might have been getting better. She had grown quieter and more cheerful. There was a feeling about her that her suffering was about to end. On my mother's birthday, my grandmother brought home a small cake to celebrate. She found her daughter hanging from the ceiling fan. She told me of how helpless she felt that day. All her help had come so late. She had made up stories to deal with what had happened. She knew she shouldn't have told me that story. The story of the Nightmaker. My father's story. It had been her way of coping. She didn't know it would have affected me that way. How it would scar me. She said she was sorry for it all. I looked at the woman who saw her daughter's rapist every time she saw me. I looked at the woman who had no reason to raise me and not abandon me in the world. I kissed her on the forehead. I looked at the woman who had no reason to raise me, to not abandon me in the world. I kissed her on the forehead and thanked her for having loved me. There was so much I didn't say. How many times she saved my life. But I hoped it was enough. I held her hand. I stayed with her until the day she died 3 weeks later. I don't want to say anything good about this place we're born into. It's such a horrible, cruel place to live. The world was cruel, but my grandmother made it so much brighter for me. Her eyes were like 2 pinpricks of light in immeasurable darkness. The world is horrifying, that is the truth. But don't lose hope in each other. Sometimes it's the only thing keeping each other alive. Don't lose your goodwill. Don't lose your soul. So quotes this raven. Thank you, my darlings. I hope you enjoyed this. I so appreciate you coming to view my little stories. And a special thanks to my Patreon supporters. To Ermin Case, Darren Daw, and Laura Setapenry. If you like this, please hit the little button to let me know. If you didn't, hit the little button to let me know. Leave a comment. I'm always glad to talk with you, my darlings. I'm open to suggestions and criticisms, critiques. If you have not subscribed, please do so and ring the little bell so you know when to come up and see me. And I will talk to you next time, my darlings. Farewell.